I want you to walk completely outside of your house right now. Look directly down at the physical dirt beneath your feet and deeply analyze the terrifying, entirely invisible prison that you are currently standing inside. From the exact moment you took your very first breath as a completely innocent human being, society aggressively began a highly calculated, deeply emotional psychological operation to completely brainwash you into believing a massive, mathematically destructive lie. They entirely convinced you that simply because your physical body happened to be accidentally born on this highly specific, completely arbitrary piece of geographical land, you are permanently, morally obligated to surrender exactly 50% of your entirely exhausted, highly valuable human life force to a massive, incredibly inefficient government machine. You have been completely conditioned through deep cultural guilt, highly emotional historical anthems, and relentless state propaganda to genuinely believe that paying massive, permanently crushing taxes is your absolute noble duty as a good citizen. But today, I am going to expose a geographical and financial reality so incredibly dark, so highly guarded, and so mathematically terrifying that you will absolutely never, ever look at a world map the exact same way for the rest of your natural life. The massive, highly bloated modern governments absolutely love the deeply asleep, highly emotional middle class. They completely rely on your fierce geographical loyalty to aggressively fund their terrifying corporate bailouts, their massive endless wars, and their completely corrupt political campaigns. The true untouchable masters of the economic universe do not possess a single ounce of this highly toxic, deeply manipulated geographical loyalty. They entirely, completely erase physical borders from their highly elevated minds. In this massive video, we are going to violently unplug you from the toxic, deeply ingrained illusion of the geographical tax matrix. We are going to expose the brutal, highly calculated mathematics of geographical arbitrage, explain the terrifying psychological warfare used to completely keep you physically trapped in a high-tax jurisdiction, and show you exactly how the global elite aggressively utilize a completely invisible strategy called flag theory to become mathematically untouchable, entirely tax-free citizens of the world. And if you stick with me until the absolute end of this massive video, I will give you the exact step-by-step psychological escape plan to completely assassinate your geographical brainwashing, aggressively completely untether your physical income, and forcefully transition from a highly drained, geographically imprisoned taxpayer into an untouchable, mathematically lethal master of absolute global freedom. To truly understand the absolute magnitude of this massive global illusion, we must completely deconstruct the exact relationship between a human being and a modern government. I want you to completely strip away the colorful flags, the loud parades, and the highly emotional historical statues. When you aggressively remove all of the highly manipulated psychological theater, a government is absolutely nothing more than a massive, highly monopolized corporate service provider. They aggressively extract a massive mandatory subscription fee entirely from your physical paycheck. And in exchange, they are supposed to provide you with basic physical security, highly functional infrastructure, and a stable economic environment. But I want you to look incredibly closely at exactly what the massive working class is actually receiving for their deeply exhausting 50% tax bracket today. The massive public infrastructure is entirely crumbling into dust. The physical streets are completely overrun with highly terrifying, completely unchecked crime, and the massive central banks are aggressively entirely melting the purchasing power of your highly taxed fiat currency through relentless, entirely criminal inflation. If you were completely forced to mathematically analyze this exact relationship in the completely ruthless private sector, you would be absolutely horrified. If you physically walked into a private supermarket and the highly corrupt manager aggressively demanded that you hand over exactly half of your entire monthly salary for a single moldy loaf of bread while simultaneously insulting your entire family, you would absolutely never, ever return to that completely toxic business. you would simply, quietly turn around, aggressively walk directly across the street, and happily give your massive valuable capital to a highly efficient, incredibly respectful competitor who actually provides massive, undeniable value. But when the massive, incredibly bloated government completely fails to provide basic human safety while aggressively raising your physical taxes every single year, the deeply asleep middle class completely refuses to leave. They are entirely psychologically paralyzed by a massive, highly toxic emotional attachment to a completely invisible line drawn on a piece of paper. The elite completely entirely reject this massive illusion. They aggressively treat every single government on the face of the planet exactly like a highly replaceable, entirely disposable corporate vendor. This absolute, entirely mathematical detachment is the fundamental bedrock of a massive, highly guarded elite strategy known entirely as flag theory. The true masters of the economic universe deeply understand that placing their entire physical existence, their massive glowing wealth, and their highly valuable business operations entirely under the absolute control of one single, desperate government is absolute, complete financial suicide. Instead, they aggressively plant multiple different flags in highly strategic, completely separate countries to forcefully create a massive, impenetrable titanium shield entirely around their personal freedom. They aggressively hold a physical passport from a highly secure, completely neutral country that absolutely never taxes the foreign income of its citizens. They entirely structure their massive, highly profitable digital corporations in zero-tax jurisdictions with highly impenetrable privacy laws, and they physically spend their completely untethered, highly luxurious daily lives in incredibly beautiful, entirely safe countries where the massive cost of living is completely microscopic compared to the terrifyingly expensive Western world. Let us look at the brutal, undeniable mathematical reality of exactly how this massive geographical arbitrage completely destroys the middle-class matrix. Imagine a completely average, highly exhausted software engineer living in an incredibly expensive Western city. They aggressively trade 80 hours of their finite human life every single week to earn exactly $100,000 a year. The massive, highly desperate government violently instantly extracts exactly $40,000 in pure income tax. The remaining $60,000 is aggressively, entirely devoured by massive, highly inflated physical rent, incredibly expensive toxic food, and entirely unavoidable basic survival costs. At the absolute end of the highly exhausting year, the completely drained worker has absolutely zero physical capital left to actually build true generational wealth. They are mathematically a highly paid, completely broke corporate slave, entirely chained to a highly expensive physical desk. Now, look incredibly closely at an entirely awake, mathematically lethal sovereign producer making the exact same $100,000 through a highly scalable, entirely borderless digital business. They entirely pack their bags, aggressively board a silver airplane, and physically relocate to an incredibly beautiful, entirely safe tropical environment where the government aggressively welcomes foreign capital. Because they completely structured their business in a zero-tax jurisdiction, they mathematically keep exactly 100% of their massive, glowing golden cash flow. Because the exact cost of living in their new physical environment is completely microscopic. They live entirely like an absolute ancient king in a massive luxury villa while spending only a tiny fraction of their completely untethered income. They aggressively entirely funnel the massive remaining river of highly liquid capital directly into acquiring heavily compounding, massive, cash-flowing assets. The completely brainwashed worker in the Western city is actively entirely funding endless foreign wars with their physical exhaustion, while the awake global producer is aggressively, entirely building a massive, untouchable financial empire, entirely in the dark. The massive system absolutely, completely despises the concept of the sovereign individual. They aggressively use their massive corporate media megaphones to highly demonize anyone who completely refuses to participate in their highly toxic tax extraction matrix. They will aggressively call you completely unpatriotic. They will heavily label you as a selfish traitor. And they will violently try to shame you into returning to the physical sheep pen. You absolutely must completely understand that this massive public shaming is nothing more than the desperate, highly terrifying screams of a massive parasite that is actively, completely losing its absolute favorite human host. The massive government absolutely does not care about your personal happiness. They completely do not care about your family's financial security. And they absolutely entirely do not care if you physically work yourself into an early, completely miserable grave. They entirely view you as a highly profitable, entirely controllable biological battery, and they are completely terrified of the exact moment you entirely realize that the massive iron door to your geographical cage was actually completely unlocked the entire time. If you are listening to this exact sentence right now and you feel a massive, heavy iron anchor violently detaching from your physical body, completely realizing that your entire geographical identity was an aggressively funded, highly calculated psychological operation designed entirely to keep you paying completely unjustified massive taxes, you are officially stepping completely out of the geographic slave matrix. But I must issue a very serious, incredibly urgent warning right now. Violently, completely unlinking your physical location from your primary source of income is an incredibly difficult, deeply complex transition. Your entirely conditioned brain will violently, aggressively fight you, desperately begging for the highly toxic, completely fake safety of your highly taxed hometown. You must be completely, mentally prepared to endure this temporary, absolutely terrifying physical discomfort in order to entirely secure your permanent, absolute geographical freedom and entirely reclaim your own human autonomy. Grab a heavy pen and a blank piece of paper right now. Eliminate absolutely all distractions completely around you. Violently turn off your glowing television screen and strictly prepare to execute this actionable step-by-step escape plan to permanently assassinate your geographical brainwashing, aggressively completely untether your income, and forcefully transition from a highly compliant, heavily bleeding taxpayer into an untouchable, mathematically lethal master of massive global leverage. Rule number 1. You must completely, radically, and violently reprogram your entire psychological relationship with your physical birthplace. You must permanently stop viewing your massive, highly inefficient government as a completely sacred, unquestionable authority figure. You must deeply and profoundly understand that you completely, entirely owe absolutely nothing to a massive political machine that aggressively steals your human energy to fund its own corrupt existence. You must aggressively and ruthlessly start completely treating countries exactly like you treat a massive corporate hotel. If the incredibly expensive hotel is completely dirty, highly unsafe, and the management aggressively insults you while entirely raising the massive daily rate, you absolutely do not completely sit in the lobby and violently argue with the front desk. You simply completely pack your bags and entirely take your massive valuable capital to a far superior, highly welcoming establishment. Your new absolute permanent goal is to completely go absolutely entirely where you are massively treated best. Rule number 2. You must aggressively initiate a massive, relentless transition, completely away from any highly localized, entirely physical form of income. The absolute most terrifying, deeply dangerous financial position you can possibly hold in the modern world is a highly taxed physical job that completely, entirely requires your physical body to be standing in a highly specific geographical location. You absolutely must entirely violently assassinate the toxic, deeply ingrained desire for a traditional corporate office. You must completely violently redirect your massive human energy into entirely aggressively building a completely borderless, highly scalable digital machine that absolutely entirely generates massive glowing cash flow completely independent of your physical coordinates. Whether it is highly complex software, massive digital consulting, or completely borderless e-commerce, your absolute primary objective is to entirely, completely sever the heavy iron chain connecting your massive bank account to your physical geography. Rule number 3. You must completely embrace the absolute, undeniable superpower of massive global arbitrage. Once your massive income is completely untethered from your physical location, you completely possess the absolute ultimate cheat code to the modern economic universe. You must physically transition your entire existence to aggressively earn massive, incredibly strong foreign currencies while completely entirely spending highly weak, incredibly cheap local currencies. You must aggressively entirely research highly secure, entirely welcoming jurisdictions that completely absolutely offer massive tax incentives for foreign capital. You completely stop highly struggling to survive in a deeply decaying, entirely heavily taxed Western city, and you aggressively entirely step into the completely invisible, untouchable, godlike lifestyle of a completely sovereign citizen who mathematically entirely controls absolutely every single variable of their own human existence. Let us completely summarize this brutal, completely mind-bending geographical reality before you go out and take massive, life-changing action today. The massive, traditional concept of lifelong physical citizenship is a perfectly designed, highly efficient psychological trap. They aggressively and constantly weaponize a highly controlled emotional narrative to legally extract your incredibly valuable human energy, completely converting your natural desire for community into deep, highly predictable financial servitude. The traditional societal behavior to constantly remain completely loyal to a massive government that aggressively, actively destroys your absolute purchasing power is the absolute most dangerous, toxic, and mathematically destructive lifestyle in the modern world. It mathematically guarantees that you will completely remain a highly drained, constantly bleeding target, permanently trapped on an exhausting, rusty hamster wheel of endless taxation. The absolute only possible way to completely win this entirely rigged game is to violently unplug yourself from the geographical matrix, aggressively embrace massive global arbitrage, and forcefully adopt the invisible, untouchable, godlike lifestyle of an entirely borderless sovereign producer, exactly like a true master of the universe. If this terrifying, reality-shattering geographical information finally completely opened your eyes, if you feel like I just violently ripped you entirely out of the massive tax slave matrix and finally handed you the absolute dark truth about exactly why you were completely convinced to stay exactly where you are, then I absolutely need you to completely destroy that like button and aggressively subscribe to the channel right now. You absolutely cannot afford to miss the extremely high-level, highly aggressive wealth-building strategies we have coming up next on this massive, reality-breaking channel. And speaking of massive financial traps that are specifically engineered to completely lock up your highly valuable capital and mathematically guarantee that the exact same massive corporate system violently extracts massive, completely unjustified fees from your life savings while you are entirely physically terrified to even touch your own money. If you truly want to deeply understand the absolute biggest, most highly manipulative lie ever told by the traditional retirement industry, and exactly how the concept of the standard 401k plan is a massive, incredibly toxic psychological prison designed entirely to lock the exact money you earned as a completely obedient taxpayer away until you are entirely completely too old to actually enjoy it, you absolutely have to watch this video right here on the screen. In it, I completely and ruthlessly break down the ultimate Wall Street lockup illusion, and I show you exactly why the true elite completely refuse to hand their capital over to greedy, highly paid mutual fund managers, choosing instead to aggressively build massive private empires they completely control today. Click that video right now. Your future, highly borderless, absolutely untethered. and permanently free self will eternally thank you. I will see you over there on the completely other side.